The marble floor of the Grand Regency Hotel gleamed under the glow of towering chandeliers, each crystal catching the light like 1,000 small suns. Laughter and the low hum of polished voices filled the air, a blend of business deals and social chatter. Bellboys hurried with silver trays, heels clicked against stone, and the faint scent of jasmine trailed behind women in designer gowns. In the middle of this glittering world, an 8-year-old girl stood completely still, her small hand wrapped around a folded piece of paper, her other hand guiding a white cane across the polished floor. Her name was Jade Johnson. She wore a faded yellow dress that was a size too big, the hem brushing her ankles, and her shoes had scuffed soles. Though her eyes were a pale, unseeing gray, there was something strangely calm about her face. She tilted her head slightly, as though listening to the heartbeat of the room, as though the sounds painted pictures sharper than sight ever could. And then, through the layers of perfume, money, and arrogance, Jade caught the sound she had been waiting for, the measured, self-assured steps of Victoria Harlow. Victoria was the kind of woman who owned every room she entered. Late 50s, wrapped in silk and diamonds, she wore her wealth not as an accessory but as armor. People parted when she passed. Men glanced twice, not at her beauty, age had softened that, but at the force she carried in her stride. She was a woman who had climbed, clawed, and conquered. No one dared interrupt her. No one, except Jade. As Victoria approached, Jade's small hand reached out and caught the edge of her sleeve. The fabric was smooth, expensive, and cool beneath her fingers. Victoria halted instantly, her brows furrowing as she looked down at the child who dared to touch her. "Excuse me," Victoria said sharply, her voice edged with disdain. "What do you think you are doing?" Jade tilted her chin up, her unseeing eyes focused somewhere past Victoria's face. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried with a strange weight that made a few passers-by glance over. "Ma'am," Jade said, "can you read this letter for me? It's very important." She extended the folded paper in her hand, her tiny fingers trembling slightly, not with fear, but with the effort of holding it steady. Victoria blinked at the letter as if it were an insult. She let out a laugh, the kind that sliced more than soothed. "I don't have time for games, child. Give it to your mother or whoever you belong to. I'm not here to entertain beggars." But Jade didn't let go. Her small fingers held firm to the sleeve, surprising Victoria with their quiet strength. The girl's voice came again, softer this time, but steady, like she already knew no one else could read it but her. "Please, ma'am, just a few words, it matters." Something about the way she said it, no pleading, no whining, just certainty, made Victoria hesitate. Her irritation grew sharper because she couldn't quite place the feeling crawling under her skin. Why did this blind child sound so sure? Why did the words, "it matters," land like a stone in her chest? Victoria pulled her arm free with a flick, but the moment her sleeve slipped from Jade's grasp, a strange silence fell between them. The sounds of the lobby blurred, fading like background noise. It was just the two of them now, the powerful woman and the small blind girl, a folded letter hanging in the air like a secret waiting to be opened. For the first time in a long time, Victoria felt something unfamiliar, unsettled. And Jade, still holding the letter in her fragile hand, stood waiting, her head tilted slightly as though she could hear the doubt pulsing in Victoria's heart. "Read it," Jade whispered again, her voice so soft that Victoria almost thought she imagined it. But she hadn't, and somehow in that moment Victoria knew this was not a chance encounter. This was something else, something dangerous, something inevitable. The letter trembled faintly between Jade's fingers, though her face remained composed. Around them the lobby buzzed on, heels clattering, glasses clinking, voices floating. But Victoria felt as if the child had drawn a circle around them, shutting out the world. For a woman who thrived on control, that realization was unbearable. She let out a sharp sigh and snapped her fingers for a bellboy. "Take this child to the concierge. She's clearly lost." But Jade's chin lifted, her pale eyes fixed upward as though staring through Victoria. Her words slipped out quiet, deliberate. "I'm not lost. I came here for you." The bellboy hesitated, his hands frozen at his side, caught between obedience to Victoria and the unexplainable gravity of the girl's tone. Victoria felt the air thicken. She snatched the paper from Jade's hand, more to end the scene than to indulge her request. The letter was worn soft from being folded and unfolded, the edges frayed. The ink on the outside was smudged, as though someone had handled it with damp fingers. No seal, no signature, just weight. Victoria unfolded it with a scoff, her eyes darting across the first lines, and froze. Her pulse thudded once, hard. Words she hadn't seen in decades stared back at her, words that belonged to another life, another name, a name she had buried so deep no one alive should know it. Her throat tightened. She folded the paper back quickly, slipping it against her palm as if hiding it would erase what she'd seen. "Nonsense," she muttered, shaking her head. "Some childish scribble." Jade tilted her head, listening to the rhythm of her voice, the tightness that no lie could mask. "You didn't read it aloud," she said softly. Victoria's jaw clenched. "Because it's not worth reading. You're wasting everyone's time." But Jade took a small step closer. The cane tapped once against the marble, the sound sharp, calm, demanding attention. "Are you afraid of the words, ma'am?" The question cut deeper than it should have. Afraid? Victoria Harlow, afraid of ink on paper? Impossible. And yet the heat crawling up her neck betrayed her. A pair of businessmen paused by the elevators, their curious eyes flicking toward the strange tableau, a billionaire in diamonds cornered by a blind child in a faded dress. Victoria felt the weight of those glances and snapped, "Enough of this. Do you know who I am?" Jade's lips curved into the faintest smile, one that didn't belong to an 8-year-old. "Yes," she said, "but I also know who you were." The sentence slipped between them like a blade. Victoria's grip on the letter tightened, the paper crumpling slightly. Her heart pounded with an old, unwelcome rhythm, the rhythm of a life she had killed to become who she was now. Her instinct screamed to walk away, to crush the letter, to silence the child. But something about the unshakable calm in Jade's voice rooted her to the marble floor. For the first time in years, Victoria Harlow, the woman who commanded boardrooms, silenced rivals, and bent politicians with a phone call, felt a tremor of panic. And Jade stood quietly in her shadow, waiting, as though she knew this was only the beginning. Victoria pressed the letter against her palm as though the heat of her skin might burn away the ink. She had built her entire life on the art of composure, on never letting anyone see the hesitation behind her smile, never allowing fear to touch her voice. But this child, with her pale, sightless eyes and her calm insistence, had found the one weak seam in the armor. She straightened her shoulders, forcing her voice into the clipped tone that had silenced CEOs and presidents alike. "I told you, it's nonsense. Whoever gave you this was playing a cruel joke." Jade tilted her head, listening. She didn't need eyes to read the lie. She heard it in the tremor Victoria fought to hide. Her small hands rested on her cane, steady, her presence unnervingly still. "If it's nonsense," she said softly, "why are your hands shaking?" The words landed like a pin dropping in a cathedral. Victoria glanced down and cursed herself. Her perfectly manicured fingers did tremble ever so slightly, the paper quivering like a guilty confession. She curled them into a fist, crushing the letter. "Children shouldn't ask questions they don't understand," she snapped. But Jade did not flinch. "I don't need to understand everything," she replied. "I just know the truth scares you." The surrounding air seemed to thin. A few people slowed as they walked past, sensing tension without knowing why. Victoria could feel eyes on her, the kind of attention she loathed, messy, uncontrolled. She leaned closer to Jade, her voice lowered to a hiss. "Listen to me. You don't know who you're dealing with. I could have you removed from this hotel in a heartbeat." Yet Jade only smiled faintly, as if the threat slid right past her. "You can't remove words," she whispered. "You can't throw them out. They follow you." Something cold slid down Victoria's spine. This child, this blind girl who should have been powerless, was speaking like someone who had seen behind her carefully drawn curtains. Victoria felt the cracks forming, tiny but unstoppable. She straightened, trying to reclaim the room with her posture, her jewels, her reputation. "I don't have time for this," she said louder, glancing at the curious faces now turning toward her. She folded the letter once more and shoved it back into Jade's small hand, as though returning it would erase the encounter. But Jade didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her voice carrying across the marble floor with quiet clarity. "You didn't read it aloud because it spoke your name." Victoria froze. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. The clinking glasses, the rolling suitcases, the chatter by the concierge desk, it all seemed to fade into silence. Her name. Not the name the papers knew, not the name engraved on skyscrapers and charity wings. The other one, the one she had buried so deep no one should ever know. Her throat went dry, her polished smile slipping for the first time in decades. You don't know what you're saying, she whispered, but Jade only turned her face toward her, unseeing eyes soft yet unrelenting. I do. I know who you really are. And in that moment, the woman who had ruled empires felt the first true crack in the mask she had worn all her life. The chandeliers above seemed to flicker, though their light never faltered. Victoria's world tilted for a moment, her heels sinking into the marble as though the stone itself had betrayed her. The child's words clung to her like smoke, unshakable, suffocating. She wanted to laugh, to dismiss it all, to walk away and leave this ridiculous encounter behind. But when she opened her mouth, no sound came. Jade, small and steady, lifted her face again. Her blind eyes gleamed faintly, like clouds hiding a storm. Her lips moved with deliberate care, and she spoke a name, one that had not been spoken aloud in this country for more than 30 years. Chun. The syllable was soft, almost tender, yet it struck Victoria harder than any insult ever hurled at her. It was the name that lived only in the shadows of memory, the name she had abandoned the day she walked away from her past and chose power over truth. Hearing it here, in the lobby of the Grand Regency, in the mouth of a child who should know nothing of her, was unbearable. Victoria's breath caught. Her throat closed around the single word. For a heartbeat, she thought she might faint, but fainting was weakness, and weakness was something she had never allowed herself. She forced her chin higher, stretching her lips into a thin smile. You must be mistaken, she said, her voice brittle. That name means nothing to me. But Jade's head tilted, listening to the tremor she couldn't hide. It means everything to you, the girl whispered, because it's who you were before you chose to forget. The air shifted around them. Conversations seemed to dull, replaced by a silence thick with curiosity. A businessman at the reception desk turned his head. A woman in pearls paused mid-step. Something about the way the child spoke, so calm, so sure, drew attention like a magnet. Victoria's pulse hammered in her ears. She leaned, head down quickly, her diamond earrings brushing her cheeks. Her whisper was fierce. Where did you hear that? Who sent you? Jade's lips quirked in the faintest trace of a smile. A letter doesn't need to be sent, she said. It only needs to be read. Victoria's skin prickled. That name was not supposed to exist here. She had paid dearly, money, silence, denial, to bury it. She had rewritten her story, polished it until no one could trace the dirt beneath. And yet this blind child had unearthed it like it had been waiting, patient, all along. Her hands itched to tear the letter to pieces, to scatter it across the marble floor and stamp it into dust. But she knew, even if the paper vanished, the word would remain. Jade had already spoken it aloud. The sound had entered the air, and there was no taking it back. You don't know what you're talking about, Victoria said again, softer now, almost pleading. Jade turned her face toward the ceiling as though listening to an invisible echo. Her voice was low, but every syllable carried. I know enough. I know you built your life on lies. I know you buried your name to bury your people, and I know the letter in your hand carries the truth you tried to erase. The cane tapped once against the floor, the sound sharp as a gavel. For the first time in years, Victoria felt the past clawing its way up from the grave she had dug for it, and though she stood in silken diamonds beneath golden light, she felt small, exposed, and Jade, tiny, blind, and unshakable, stood as though she could see her perfectly. Victoria's breath came faster now, each inhale sharp enough to sting. She wanted to command the room again, to reclaim the dignity she wore like a crown, but every time she looked at the blind girl before her, that crown felt like it was slipping, inch by inch, down into the shadows of the marble floor. Jade, still as a statue, held her cane lightly in one hand. Her other hand lingered by her pocket, fingers brushing against something unseen. Then, without a word, she pulled out a small, silver device. The faint glow of a red button caught the light. A recorder. Victoria's heart dropped. Jade's small thumb traced the edges of the device, and her voice carried like a bell in the hushed lobby. It's not just the letter, ma'am. I have your voice, too. The sentence carved through the air. A few curious guests stopped pretending to check their phones and turned openly now, their eyes fixed on the strange confrontation. Victoria's lips parted, but no words came. She could feel sweat prick beneath the collar of her silk blouse, even though the lobby was cool. You don't know what you're holding, she managed, her voice low, trembling against her will. Jade's blind eyes lifted toward her, unblinking. I know exactly what it is. I've listened to it many times. Your words, ma'am, your orders, the things you thought no one else would hear. She pressed the button, and then, in Victoria's own sharp voice, the recorder spoke. Cut their hours, pay them half. If they complain, remind them there are 100 more desperate enough to take their place. Gasps rippled across the lobby. A woman with pearls clutched her chest. A man in a tailored suit whispered to his companion. Victoria's head whipped around, her eyes darting at the faces gathering in a loose circle. The sound of her own cruelty played back in a loop, merciless, undeniable. "Turn that off," she hissed. Lunging forward, but Jade held the recorder behind her small back. Though her hands were tiny, her grip was fierce. "No," Jade said simply. "You've hidden behind walls and money long enough. The words belong to everyone now." Victoria froze, her hands trembling midair. For the first time in her life, she realized she couldn't snatch power back with a contract or a threat. This wasn't a rival board member or a journalist who could be bought. This was a blind girl, a child, who couldn't be bribed and couldn't be intimidated. Jade's voice was quiet but unyielding. "My hands may be small, but they carry the truth." The sentence struck harder than the recording itself. For a fleeting moment, Victoria saw herself reflected in the girl, not in power, but in the fear of being small, invisible, unheard. It was a fear she had buried long ago when she chose to erase her real name. Now that buried self was standing before her, embodied in this child. Around them, the crowd thickened, whispers rising like a tide. Victoria felt her empire tilting, its foundation cracking in plain sight. And Jade, fragile and unmovable, stood like the tide itself, patient, inevitable. Victoria's voice finally broke. "What do you want from me?" she demanded. Jade turned her face toward her, unseeing eyes filled with something that felt like light. Not money, not pity, only the truth. And then, with deliberate slowness, she lifted the letter again. "Read it, out loud." Victoria's throat constricted. She could no longer hide. The walls she had built all her life were beginning to collapse, and this little girl was holding the hammer. The lobby no longer hummed with casual chatter. It pulsed with tension, thick and unyielding, as though the marble itself was holding its breath. Guests had stopped pretending. They formed a wide circle around the spectacle, phones raised, eyes unblinking. Some whispered, others filmed, all waiting for the next word to fall like a stone in water. Victoria stood rigid in the center, the letter clutched tightly in her manicured hands. Her diamonds glittered beneath the chandeliers, but no amount of sparkle could distract from the unease tightening her jaw. She had always known how to command a room. Tonight, the room commanded her. Jade waited patiently, her pale, clouded eyes lifted toward a woman she could not see, but could somehow read better than anyone else in the lobby. "Read it," the girl repeated softly, each syllable deliberate, unhurried. "Read it for everyone here." Victoria's heart thundered. Every instinct told her to tear the paper in two, to declare it a forgery, to buy silence with a wave of her hand. But the crowd, oh, the crowd, their expectant faces pressed her down harder than any courtroom judge could. And then, as though the universe itself conspired, the elevator doors opened at the far end of the lobby, and out poured a group of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones raised. Someone had tipped them off. Victoria's blood ran cold. The crowd shifted, gasps rippling as lenses focused on her, the infamous tycoon cornered by a blind child. One of the reporters called out, "Ms. Harlow, what does the letter say? Is it true you've been hiding your past?" Another's voice rang out, "Did you exploit immigrant workers for profit?" The question stabbed through the air like knives. Victoria's mask faltered. She lifted her chin, forcing a brittle smile. "This is absurd. A setup, a child's prank, nothing more." But Jade's small voice cut through, dire than all the noise around her. "If it's a prank, then read it. Let them hear." The words silenced the room again. Phones tilted forward, cameras zoomed closer. Victoria's fingers shook against the paper. She had faced hostile boardrooms, government inquiries, even betrayals from those she once called allies. But never this, never a child demanding the truth in front of the world. With no escape left, she unfolded the letter. Her voice trembled as she began. "To my daughter." She stopped, lips parting in disbelief. Her pulse hammered in her ears. The crowd stirred. Jade stood motionless, her small hands folded neatly over her cane. She didn't move, didn't flinch, only listened. Victoria forced herself to continue, her voice breaking against each word. The letter spoke of origins long denied, of a girl once named Chun, of poverty and sacrifice, of a mother who warned her not to forget where she came from. Gasps cut through the lobby. Reporters scribbled furiously. Phones recorded every syllable. By the time Victoria reached the end, Her mascara streaked faintly at the corners of her eyes. She dropped the letter to her side, breath uneven. She wanted to scream, to demand silence, to take back every word, but the damage was done. The truth was no longer hers to control. The letter had spoken, and Jade, standing quietly in her faded yellow dress, whispered into the silence. The words always find their way back. The crowd erupted, flashes igniting like lightning. Reporters surged forward. Victoria staggered back a step, drowning in their voices, their questions, their hungry eyes. Her empire, her identity, was no longer untouchable. It was bleeding, unraveling, collapsing in the very lobby where she had once reigned. And the blind child had lit the match. Victoria had never known silence to feel so loud. Cameras flashed like lightning, reporters shouted her name as though dragging it from its pedestal, and the weight of every gaze pressed down on her shoulders. She had commanded governments, silenced rivals, bent industries with a single phone call. Yet here, before a blind child and a letter she could no longer deny, she felt stripped, naked in a world she had once ruled. The letter still trembled in her hand. Her instincts screamed to run, to claw her way out of the circle of lights and eyes, to find sanctuary in the limousine waiting outside. But running would confirm everything, and if there was one thing Victoria Harlow had never done, it was flee. So she lashed out instead. "This is manipulation," she barked, her voice sharp, cutting through the frenzy. "This child was planted here. This stunt was orchestrated by my enemies. Do you think an 8-year-old girl can uncover secrets of decades past? Ridiculous!" Her words rang with power, but not conviction. The crowd didn't shrink. They leaned closer. Jade lifted her chin, unseeing eyes steady, her small voice carrying with a clarity that silenced the lobby again. Truth doesn't need eyes. It only needs ears willing to listen. The cane tapped once against the marble. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Victoria's mask cracked further, her painted smile twitching under the strain. She felt the empire she had built, brick by brick, lie by lie, begin to tilt beneath her feet. A reporter shoved forward. "Ms. Harlow, is it true your real name is Victoria Chun? Were you involved in the labor scandal overseas?" Another followed, voice sharp. "Did you abandon your family to build your fortune? What do you say to the workers who suffered under your orders?" The questions were knives, each slicing a wound she couldn't hide. She eyed her hand to silence them, but the noise swelled louder. And then, Jade's recorder clicked on again. This time, the voice that spilled into the room wasn't just Victoria's ruthless commands. It was softer, younger, an old recording, one that Victoria herself had forgotten. The voice trembled with an accent she had worked years to erase. "I won't be Chun forever. I'll leave it all behind. I'll make them forget who I was." The words hung in the air, undeniable. The crowd gasped. Reporters surged forward. Phones captured every second. Victoria staggered back, one hand pressed against her chest. That voice, her own voice from decades ago, was a ghost she thought she had buried. To hear it again was to feel the grave crack open beneath her feet. Jade lowered the recorder, her face calm, her voice soft yet fierce. "You can erase names, you can bury people, but you can't silence the past. It always waits for its moment to speak." Victoria's knees nearly buckled. She clutched the letter like a lifeline, but it betrayed her, its paper crumpling in her desperate grip. Around her, the lobby no longer looked like marble and crystal. It looked like a courtroom, a stage, a reckoning. And standing at its center, small and unshaken, was the blind child who had undone her. The chandeliers blazed above, but Victoria felt no warmth from their light. Sweat trickled beneath the collar of her silk blouse, her diamond necklace suddenly heavy, like chains pressing into her skin. The circle around her had thickened. Guests, staff, reporters, all eyes hungry, all phones raised. She, the woman who once commanded silence with a single glance, now stood cornered by a truth she could not bend. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "You..." She jabbed a manicured finger toward Jade. "You don't know what you're doing. You're being used. Someone fed you lies to ruin me." But her voice cracked, betraying her. Jade did not move. She stood rooted, her small hands steady on the cane, her pale eyes turned toward Victoria as if she saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. When she finally spoke, her words were soft, yet they cut sharper than any accusation. "No one fed me lies. My grandmother wrote that letter herself." The lobby stilled, Victoria's breath caught. A name pulsed in her memory, a name she had fought to bury under layers of luxury and distance. Ruby Johnson. Jade's tiny fingers tightened around the folded paper. She told me the truth you wanted the world to forget. She said I might be too young to understand it all, but one day I'd be strong enough to speak it, and tonight, I am. The cane tapped once. The sound echoed through the marble like a verdict delivered. Victoria's knees weakened. She clutched the edge of the concierge desk to keep herself upright, her empire slipping through her trembling fingers. Ruby, she whispered, as though the name itself were poison. Yes, Jade said, her face lifting toward her with unflinching calm. Ruby Johnson, the woman you left behind, the woman you called mother. Gasps exploded around the room. Cameras flashed brighter, reporters shouting over one another. Mother, mother, the word struck V. Victoria harder than any accusation of fraud or cruelty. She felt it tear through the fortress she had built because it wasn't business, it wasn't scandal, it was blood, it was origin, it was the truth she had amputated from herself. Her legs buckled. She sank against the desk, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She had clawed her way to the top, stripped herself of her name, her accent, her people, only for her mother's words, carried in the fragile hands of a blind child, to pull her down in front of the world. Jade's voice trembled now, not with fear, but with the weight of something final. She wanted you to remember who you were before the money, before the lies. She wanted you to know she forgave you, even if the world never will. The recorder clicked again. A new voice filled the air, old, raspy, trembling with age. Ruby's voice. Victoria, if you ever hear this, know that I loved you. But the shame of forgetting where you came from will haunt you more than poverty ever could. The sound broke Victoria. Her shoulders shook as the first sob ripped from her chest. The crowd watched, stunned, as the woman who had towered above them all sank to her knees on the marble floor. Her empire was gone. Her mask was shattered. Her past was laid bare. And at the center of it all stood Jade, small, blind, and unshakable, the vessel of truth her grandmother had chosen. The girl bent her head slightly, listening to the hush that had fallen. Her voice, though quiet, filled the space with a clarity that no camera could distort. Tonight, the world saw your empire fall, but I didn't come here to destroy you. I came to remind you, no one can bury the truth forever. The chandeliers above seemed to flicker again, though they held their light. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Harlow wept, not as a tycoon, not as a conqueror, but as a daughter who could no longer hid from her mother's voice.